This is the Dreadful Podcast, the 499th episode of TV Podcast Industries, and we're talking about Penny Dreadful, City of Angels, finale of Season 1, Day of the Dead.
City of Angels needs us, pal.
Amen, brother.
And all of this was about a damn freeway.
It's not just a freeway. It's population control. You cut off the Chicanos with a barrier of concrete and steel. You put them in the ghetto. And then you put up another freeway around the coloreds. And then the Jews. And then the Chinese. They're not building roads. They're building walls. This is not the United States of America.
Welcome back, fellow Penny Faithful. This is TV Podcast Industries. We're talking about the finale of Season 1 of Penny Dreadful, City of Angels, Day of the Dead. I'm one of your hosts, Derek.
I'm your other host, Chris.
And rounding out the group, I'm one of your other hosts, John. Yes, I get sausage today. Like Councillor Townsend. Hooray!
We all know Councillor Townsend loves sausage. So,
absolutely. Yeah. What a lucky chap he is. A big plate full of sausages.
Absolutely.
Do you think it was German sausage or American sausage that was actually living in Germany for a while and came back to America?
Maybe.
Yeah, I was wondering whether it was a big bratwurst or whether it's some kind of American lynx or whatever.
It looked like lynx, but I like that that's the end of his diet after all of these episodes where he's being told that he must stay on a diet. Now he's like, no, we're celebrating today. You get a nice big breakfast served to you in your office, which is very cool.
I do like that. I'm not going to lie.
Well, yeah, there are some good things about the 30s, I suppose.
Just some.
Exactly. But welcome back to our wonderful Penny Faithful. We are on the final episode of our discussions about Penny Dreadful, City of Angels. As I mentioned up front, this is the 499th episode of TV Podcast Industries, which means, because I can do maths, the next episode is our 500th episode of TV Podcast Industries, and we're going to do something special for our 500th episode. We're going to be talking about all of the shows that we've covered over the course of the last 6 years of podcasting.
I feel old.
Yeah, I feel old.
That's only 6 years. A 6-year-old does not feel old.
They really should.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like they've seen some stuff. like this, especially the last 6 months. Yeah. That's at least aged me another 10 years. So we're going to call it 16 and a half years.
I think it's the amount of content that we have squeezed into the 6 years, in terms of like 22 episode seasons from Gotham, whether it was final season of Hannibal, all the Marvel Netflix stuff, movies, and certainly, I suppose, in the last sort of 12 months, diversifying a bit more, with things like The Witcher, The Watchmen, The Boys, and so on.
Talks about a lot of stuff.
A lot of stuff.
But more importantly, we've also grown our community amazingly. Our fellow Penny Faithful and industrialists and defenders and everything. You're all here, and we're glad to have you listening to us break down all of the fun.
Exactly. If you want to recap on any of our episodes that we have done over the 6 years, you can pop on over to our website, tvpodcastindustries.com, where you can listen to any of the podcasts you want or join any good or evil podcast catcher of your choice.
Yeah, you can pick them all up there. Speaking of breakdowns, let's get into our discussion about this episode, the final episode of Penny Dreadful, City of Angels. We will be doing a wrap-up about the whole series. We're going to bring on board Ray, who joined us for our coverage of the first 3 seasons of the original Penny Dreadful, and we just want to get his thoughts joined in with ours, because I'd love to know what his opinion, another fan of the original 3 series, I'd love to get his opinion on what he thought of this very different Penny Dreadful show.
Yeah, and I'll only be using my German accent small, kleiner bit during that series.
Good.
Yes.
As our listeners know, you only get about 2 or 3 seconds of your German accent edited out of the 3 or 4 hours of German accent that you usually record every episode.
Chris normally speaks in a fake German accent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's all about the Bund, you know? All about that Bund. That Bund. Anyway.
Excellent.
Oh my God, I actually really want all about that Bund into this tune of It's All About the Bass.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that could work.
I was wondering what tune you were going for there, Chris, but that's nothing new.
Most people do.
Let's get into the discussion about episode 10 of City of Angels, Day of the Dead, the finale for season 1, maybe getting a season 2 in the future, but otherwise this is the finale of Penny Dreadful, City of Angels. The episode was directed by Richard J. Lewis, started out working as director back in the 90s. Recently he directed 4 episodes of the wonderful Westworld. Which I know I've loved watching all 3 seasons of that show so far. It's been really, really good. This is the only episode of Penny Dreadful so far, that Richard has directed, but I think he did a great job. There's some really good stuff in this episode. And I know that just as an example, the scene at the opening of this episode, apparently took 80 hours of filming, to
I can imagine, yeah.
Just that march through the streets of the Pachucos and everything that was going on took 80 hours alone.
Wow.
For that one episode. You know, you remember the times we used to think that an episode was kind of filmed in 1 week and put out, you know? That's not the times when you're looking at a Showtime show or a HBO show. There's certainly a lot more work that goes into these mini movies, as they seem to be.
But even the Day of the Dead scene at the end, where we literally had, the one thing I'll definitely give Richard and probably John as well is that the casting and the extras were always doing something. And it wasn't just standing there pretending to talk. It's like during the dance hall in the cat, bar, or where they, like in this, where like I rewatched that riot scene about twice and each time they were like, I spotted different people doing different things.
Yeah.
It's great.
Really good direction, definitely. As Chris mentioned there, the episode was, of course, written by showrunner John Logan. He usually takes on board most of the episodes of the show, so he did write the last 2 episodes. John, do you want to give us the synopsis for the final episode of Penny Dreadful, City of Angels, season 1?
Sure. As the news of Diego's lynching spreads through the Crimson Cat, Fly Rico tries to placate the volatile crowd, while Rio argues for vengeance. As the Pachucos march down the main street, Petercraft, Elsa and the boys are trapped in their car as a riot rages around them. Tiago tries to help Mateo as he witnesses the death of Fly Rico at the hands of Rio, and in the aftermath of the riots, Townsend celebrates the sudden rise of his political fortunes. Tiago and Molly face reality about their relationship, and Molly confronts her mother, Miss Adelaide, leading to some unexpected and shocking news. Elsewhere, Lewis and Tiago rush to protect Brian from the Nazis, but learning of his new research into a bomb, things take a dark twist for the life of Brian. Finally, the Vega family gathers at the grave of their father and husband for a moving Day of the Dead ceremony. While Tiago is visited by Magda, the builders begin to knock down Belvedere Heights.
We had discussed in the last episode how much they had to accomplish if they were closing out the series in the final episode. I do think they covered a lot of threads and closed off some of the major threads in the final episode and definitely laid out quite a few major storylines to go on for the next season. But the opening of this episode, really, that I loved that opening, as we had Santa Marta walking through the crowd in the Crimson Cat, really showing that there's something bad going to happen here to all of the Pachucos. Yeah. I really like that opening, just in the darkness as you see her face completely alone, and then as the light rises above her, you see everybody dancing around her, and she kind of focuses on the first person that's going to die in the episode, basically, which I just thought was a lovely little touch. The first person that she looks at in the room is Fly Rico at the bar. So just a lovely little touch of having that presence of Santa Marta, because she has been outside of things for most of the episodes. Really, we've seen her come and gather the bodies of some of the dead characters during the season, but this time kind of this feels like a premonition of what's going to happen later on in the episode. We all knew it was going to be a big episode for a finale, but I like that little touch at the beginning to kind of say, this is where it's all going to begin.
Definitely. I mean, I think the thing is, it's Santa Muerte, like the outline, the image, the costume is so amazing. I mean, just the intricacy of the sort of daggered headpiece, the spiky headpiece with the skulls and just the cloth. The outline, the silhouette is just really iconic, and really, just very stunning, which is such a great visual treat that a director or a writer can work with, knowing the look of that. I kind of was expecting her, because it was so dark before obviously the hustle and bustle of the Crimson Cat came in. I thought it was going to be in Belvedere Heights underneath the lamp where Diego was hanging, just because it was so dark. I thought, she would kind of walk and then be covered in lamplight. So it was interesting that they didn't maybe do that, and then maybe she then moved onto the Crimson Cat and you had a similar kind of thing. That would have been, I think, really, really good. Such a striking image.
It was fantastic to see that. Personally, I would have preferred a follow-up continuation where post Fly Rico's departure, if you will, she was there to collect, similar to what we saw with the child who was gunned down. I think that just would have continued the thread that she doesn't care about the living, but she's there to collect the dead. And I think that or actually the collection of Diego, I think would have been good. She grabs Diego, walks him into the dark, and then continues walking and finds Fly Rico and watches there. I think that probably would have slowed down that opening, but I think it would have made more narrative sense. Personally, again, looks beautiful from a costume design. I laugh at the daggered headdress. She does hug someone, which we'll discuss later.
Absolutely.
There was a point in that hugging where you could see that one of the parts of the headdress was nearly just going right into the other actor's eye. And I was like, oh, that would be, because you'd feel it hovering in your peripheral vision.
Absolutely.
And you'd be like, don't sneeze. If you sneeze, I'm blinded.
It's the only hug on screen that requires a stunt double.
Exactly.
It may have a rubber headdress for times when Santa Muerte has to hug somebody, maybe. But yeah, I totally agree with you, Chris. I was kind of going, that's the best acting all season, when somebody has to act that they're not getting poked in the eye by a metal pointy thing. Anyway, that's just a little impression of the opening. I know we have loads of thoughts about this episode. John, do you want to kick us off with your big moment from the episode?
Yeah, my big point is this isn't the time for peacemakers, mi amor, and the riot in downtown, and just some of the things that obviously come out of that. I mean, just first off, I think the set, and the riot looks amazing. You get that feel of hustle and bustle down a really crowded, drive in Los Angeles, with cars sort of choking up it. You've got the tram line going down the middle, and then just this wave of people walking through, all the cars. I think that it just looks really good. It really felt like they were weren't in a set, but were actually, on location. I thought it looked really great, and like hearing that it's 80 odd, or 80 plus hours to do, you really get that feeling. I like the fact, it links to the whole, I think you had mentioned previously, the Zoot Suit riots, of, the early 1940s. And certainly you see that with, the sailors, getting involved here, on the streets. I think, the actual, Zoot Suit riots of 1943, it was members of the armed forces that were being housed in Southern California, and a lot of the violence was between them and the Mexican community.
And the Pachucas, specifically targeting anybody wearing the type of zoot suits that these kids were wearing at the time. Yeah, they were focusing on them as if they were a gang, and anybody wearing that type of clothing was a target for them, effectively.
Yeah,
I would say they took inspiration or the idea, I suppose, of an attack on these kids happening at the time. The Zoot Suit riots are very different. They happened over a 3-day period during 1943. It was a much, much bigger situation. I would expect if you had a couple more seasons, given what we have in this episode, the Pachucas aren't gone by any means. So I think this is just an indication of the type of attacks you could have and the type of tension that's going on between the Pachucas and other people. But this isn't the only representation we're going to have of the Zoot Suit riots if the show does continue on past season 1.
Yeah, and I actually, the one thing I'll just say, and I'll throw back to John, is they set up the sailors last episode. The sailors going into the bar and passing was a pass flyby scene in the last episode.
Very good, very good.
Which I thought was just amazing. Mm-hmm. So basically, those sailors or similar sailors were in center focus, but not focused on. Yeah. In the scene where everyone was going to the Crimson Cat.
Very good, very good.
Yeah, great
So
stuff.
I was like, they were showing that the sailors are around. These sailors just didn't pour out.
Yeah.
Because I was like, that's a bit weird. And then I thought back and went, they focused on it without actually saying they were focusing on it.
Yeah.
And I was like, clever. So it's not just, oh, hey, look, a load of sailors. They kind of showed that they were all on shore leave and there was a load of sailors in shot. Yeah. And I was just like, oh, well, I suppose it's LA. They've got a naval base. Of course, that's what's going to happen. Yeah. But yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. And it links to the Zoot Suit riots. And the other thing about it was the Pachucos, because of the style of their clothes. So cloth was rationed. Mm-hmm. So one of the justifications that was done was just that it was unpatriotic to be wasting cloth with these baggy clothes, because it was rationed so heavily. Which seems crazy but that was a reasoning.
Well, it was, and that was exactly what it was challenged when it came into this time during the war. You know, the rationing was absolutely going on for everybody, but it felt to the Mexicans and particularly the Pachucos that they were being targeted specifically by organizations saying that they were being unpatriotic so that they could be attacked. It was inciting violence against them by many organizations. I think the press were quite notable in how they were attacking Mexican communities during that time and inciting violence against them by the way the wording that they used to describe any form of story about the Mexican community at that time was inciting violence effectively. So definitely that's what was going on a bit later in time. But I think the whole concept here seems to be these tensions existed from very early on. We know all the way throughout the series how much racism is involved in this show and how much they talk about it. So this is an indication of that racism boiling over in the streets for that one night, and very quickly the National Guard being called in to shut down that whole area, and everybody effectively being put under house arrest and having roadblocks on their roads because, hey, you're Mexican, you must be at fault here, is kind of the attitude. So so I think that's again just a representation of the racism inherent in the time.
No, absolutely.
Just before we go on, I will say we do have somewhat Nostradamus elements in John Logan and Damon Lindelof in their ability to predict the pulse of the world while they're writing. That then potentially takes another year to 18 months later, and the time that this is happening, it's so prevalent and important.
Absolutely.
It's amazing. I want their ability to see the future. I will probably use it for evil, but, or at least gain, cause who doesn't want an almanac of all the sports winnings, go sports and go Back to the Future references. But anyway, it's crazy that this was probably written 18 months ago and it's even more, the writing was on the wall, but it's even more now. So important.
It's really sad that the things they're predicting are sadly these tragic events that have been going on. Like that's kind of the challenge.
But it's the history repeating. Exactly. So I mean, it does. It smacks of Nostradamus clairvoyant prediction and so on, but as well it's saying this has happened, and if we don't change, it will happen again, and it will happen again, and that's exactly the point, and the position we're in now is that people haven't been listened to and taken seriously in order to change things. And so, I think, it's really sort of precedent that it is now. But I think, as riots go, this looks really great, so to speak.
Yes.
This was just shot really nicely, has that link to the Zoot Suits, and, it feels in part like a natural reaction from the Pachucos, but I love the conflict between Florico and Rio at the bar, where, you have Florico as this voice of reason. Is it for personal reasons? Is it selfish reasons that he doesn't want to get killed? But, that idea that we have a path that we can go down, which this evening, which is one of dignity, to go and bury Diego and show that we're familiar. And that's kind of versus that inflammatory voice of Rio, who is taking the microphone off him. Now is not the time for calm. And in a sense has kind of teed up Mateo here with then her taking Florico aside and murdering him with the Pachuco knife, the flick knife there, with the line, "This isn't the time for peacemakers," and handing that blade to Mateo, with "The king is dead, long live the king," which I like the slight sort of holdback from Mateo, but ultimately, accepts that knife, and in doing so, effectively the lead, of the Pachucos, and certainly Rio has been doing everything to provide at least incendiary thoughts for Mateo, so that he will be not the calming balm that maybe Florico was, but will be this more inflammatory pro-action, pro-activist approach.
And will probably take direction from Rio. What we were talking about last episode was a lot of the slips that have been happening for all of the Magda characters and the people they're trying to influence, that there were a lot of the people they were trying to influence were falling out of her plans, effectively, including Florico here, where we see him effectively, he has a great opportunity here to stoke up a riot and stoke up killing and burning in the streets, and right in front of Rio is going, no, that's not the way. And she instantly gives the look to Mateo there. Mateo probably knows that that's the point where she will take out Florico. If he has to get rid of the leader and move it on to Mateo, that's the moment when Rio is saying that to Mateo. She said it to him verbally in an earlier episode. They had the conversation where she said, "You are the future leader." But at that moment, I think Mateo probably realizes that Florico is not long for the leadership.
Definitely. I think what's really good here, and it kind of links into another part of this, is that you have Tiago trying to look after his younger brother. There's that whole moment where he says, "Goodbye, brother," after Mateo has rescued Tiago from being beaten up by 3-4 sailors. But I love the fact that he's got the bloody knife as Tiago comes round the corner to see Florico dead. And I was thinking, he sees that aftermath, but does he think that Mateo has killed Florico here? It's another notch of another person murdered here for Mateo. But I liked as well that attack, being saved by Mateo, but the attack from the sailors, has this other implication about for Tiago, where he realizes it's absolutely does not matter whether he's a cop or a criminal, that he's just another Mexican to them. And so, this is it's a bit of a pivotal moment in terms of that realization, I think, for Tiago here. He has, he's in a white dominated LAPD. He's made detective. He is in love with a white lady in Molly, and yet his badge, any of that is for nothing out on the streets.
Yeah.
He's just another Mexican and can be subject to this violence, racism, as always. And then that spills over, with Molly, the following day, to the point where, you know, that it's impossible. The situation that they're in, their relationship, is impossible. You know, let's go outside and hold hands and see what happens. You know, and I think that's really interesting because I think as well, you know, what is Tiago's state of mind here? Is he, maybe going to a darker place in his life at the moment? So I think that's really an interesting moment here with the attack by the sailors, and certainly coupled to everything else that happens.
Yeah, definitely.
As well.
I do wonder if the attack by the sailors happens as quickly as it does, so he doesn't see Mateo holding the knife, because it is a really fast scene. And part of the reason I think that is because we don't see any fallout at all throughout the rest of the episode. We don't see, even when Tiago is talking to Mateo, we don't see him comment even on the fact that Florico's dead, or, I know Mateo says goodbye to him there, which is kind of an indication that he doesn't really care what Tiago thinks about him, but I would have expected some fallout if Tiago had thought his brother had murdered Florico. I would have expected something in the episode. I
thought exactly the same thing. When they met at the Day of the Dead scene in the graveyard, I was expecting a slight fallout. Because that was the point. I was like, okay, he's gonna go, you killed another innocent man, we're done, blah, blah, blah. So it's either option A, as you laid out, which it happened too quickly. I don't think it did, because there was enough of a, like, turn, bloody hand, knife. I think it's led to be indicated, which we'll discuss more. Tiago doesn't care. This implication that I'm not a cop, I'm not a criminal, I'm not anything, I'm just another bloody S-word. It's changing his opinion of everything that's happened.
Yeah.
Plus everything else that happens in the episode and what everything else is part of. So when we do get to the Day of the Dead scene, where he probably should have kind of gone after his brother, he can't say anything. He's implicated in a murder too now, another murder. So he doesn't care. I think this is moving towards this dark side, which we can discuss further. But the implication, it all stems from this: the king is dead, long live the king, Shakespearean scene. Yeah, where it reminded me of almost like Macbeth. Where you have death and it started to change. That death is the hinge that changes the characters. Like Mateo, the opinion I was taking from the Crimson Cat scene, where Florico was kind of stopping and Rio was inciting, was that Mateo was starting to lean towards Florico with a single tear in his eyes. Diego's dead. And then this crystallizes his descent into, like, it's Shakespearean Macbeth. He is the king, or kind of thing.
I think so. I mean, I'm kind of with you, Chris. I think there's a change in Tiago, and just depends how far that goes. Because I mean, the other thing to layer in on this, and this is another thing that I think has possibly changed his mind to say, I don't care anymore, is that actually he's working with a detective, with Lewis, who uses his position in the LAPD to protect the Jewish community and so on in LA through Dottie. Like he has a network. It's not to say that they won't care for other things on their day-to-day job, but it's kind of leveraging that position. But I think to what extent and how he will do that for Tiago, I don't know. I just thought the conversation between him and Lewis at the end was really telling, as they're seeing all the bulldozers coming in and they can see Councillor Townsend, Goss, Kurt and Miss Adelaide, this idea that there is an enemy there now, but we're detectives, but we can use that to surveil them, go after them, almost like a vigilante type of thing.
He's a Mexican Batman.
Yeah, it's kind of like it, that.
Like a real police officer chasing down bad guys and arresting them. The things that police officers should be doing.
No, exactly, but they're doing it off the books because the structures are racist. How can you deal with the LAPD when half of them won't care that you're Mexican and potentially hit you, even though you're a detective, or the city office has got someone as obnoxious as Townsend in there. So I just feel it's almost a copying of what Lewis Michner has done in the past. And I think that's really interesting as well.
I think I was just confused by both of you saying that Tiago seems like he doesn't care anymore and that he's going to go to a dark side. What I would see from this episode is actually he cares more than anything, and he wants to use his position to help his community. That's what he's always been about since the beginning. If he just sticks in long enough, then somebody else will be able to come up behind him. There will be more people like himself reflecting himself in these situations in the police system. Effectively, we heard that from his mother. You know, if he stays with it, then other people will be able to follow in his footsteps. You know, what's happening in this episode, we're seeing he's facing many, many obstacles. And even though, as you said earlier on, John, even though he's got a badge, he's not treated any differently on the street when he's walking down it, than he would be if he didn't have a badge. He's treated just like another Mexican, you know? But I don't know whether he's going dark or whether he's stopped caring. I think by the end of it, he's resolute in the fact that the city needs him and Lewis specifically to help save it. So the two of them still working their position, still in the police force, working together, protecting their communities is the way I saw it at the end. I didn't think either of them were giving up.
It's not so much the ends. It could be the means to the ends that he will go. And okay, let's just say it because of what happens in the cemetery with Magda, coming on his shoulder. Maybe. We don't hear an answer. And we don't know whether there was more to that conversation or not. And that is, you know, that irresistible little, kind of palate taster for you to kind of go, oh, okay. So is he? At the moment, I'm going, I think that could, with what happened in the alleyway, with what happened with Molly, I think there's a potential for a dark consequence or implication that he could move towards. I mean, like with the original Penny Dreadful, there was always that fine balancing line with Vanessa Ives as to whether she could spill out and ultimately become evil because of her powers. So I thought that was just interesting. I think the thing I was most, I suppose, upset about really was Mateo, that we just didn't get more. I know they're under curfew and so on. We just didn't get more from Mateo in this episode with the Fly Rico killing. I actually do feel one of my main issues I would have with the series so far is that I feel they put Mateo in a place and then basically it was in a shed with all the oil derricks around him, nodding away. And we got a few scenes where he was kind of flitting between being very distraught about what he had done and wanting to go back to the family and then being persuaded otherwise by Rio. And I think, again, you know, what side of the line? I think, obviously, the resolute stir to Rio, then and his acceptance of that mantle, then absolutely. But I just would like to have had more from Mateo.
Oh, absolutely.
Because given what what side of the fence he sits on, you know, with respect to being, you know, for violent action or whatever, I can't imagine that a curfew would as such, mean that he wouldn't do stuff. You just got to be careful. But, that was my only thing. I kind of wanted a bit more Mateo because I feel he's been lost a bit, to be honest. And I think the character's really good. And I think, the journey that he went through has been really good. And I feel that since that happened, since that alley scene where his brother lets him go, I just kind of felt he faded away a bit. You know, you had him meeting his sister in one episode, you had his mum coming around to the hut in another, you had him wanting to go and leave that place back to the family and then Rio stopping him. And anyway, that's just my own kind of feeling. So, it's a shame it didn't follow a bit more than that, or even just seeing him sort of then take charge of the crowd of
That's the
fellow
bit I
Pachicos to lead them, to kind of do that kind of, you know, on the battlefield speech kind of thing. I thought would have been kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think it's getting out of there after they've killed Florica. They're getting out of there to do what they want to do next, I suppose. What's the next plan? And there's definitely a few time jumps in this episode. There's at least about 2 weeks, I think, overall that passes during the time in this episode. You know, that the streets being locked down completely is the next scene we see after Tiago being beaten on the ground. So there's obviously been a major clear out of the city, of all the Pachucos and everybody that's fighting in these riots. That they've all been cleared out. The streets have been cleared. So that's maybe a day. I know Molly's with Tiago in the room, so it's probably not 2 or 3 days that they're there, because she has to go back to the missionary to do her next mass. But I think they're just getting out of there at the time. The riot's already in motion, and I don't think Mateo is going to stand up and stop the riot or stand up and incite the riot more. The riot is ongoing as we leave the scene, I suppose.
I think it's all up to 24 hours, up until we start getting to the Day of the Dead. And then based on what Tiago was saying, that was the following week.
A week later, yeah.
So that's where we get the time jump towards the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know we talked a lot about the riot so far, but I know there's one other major moment that's in the riot, something we haven't seen all season, John. I'm sure you want to talk about the moment between Rio and Elsa and Frank, let's say, in the riots that kicked it all off. Really.
Absolutely. This was kind of my final part of this, was just the knowing nods between the Magdas in the middle of that riot. You have Rio seeing Elsa, and you know, she's wanting to change the situation from being this kind of courteous, dignified walk down the main street to an all-out riot. And you just have the situation that the Crafts are caught in with as Frank lets out a scream. I kind of had, it's probably the first riot caused by a failure of clutch control by Peter Craft, but you know, understandable that you think you're moving on, you don't put the handbrake on. I definitely get that, but I think
3-second rule.
Exactly.
3-second rule. Come on, this is the piece.
This is where everybody drives automatics in the US now.
Absolutely, but I just really thought this was a great kind of tension to the riot with the kids being in the back. You know, just before that, lock the door, roll up the window, and kind of what happens with Tom. I mean, that whole scene where the baseball bat is used to smash that back window, and you had Tom's face up against that back window, and I actually was thinking, that's hit him in the face, so does that mean he's actually going to die? And in some ways, I was slightly relieved when he just had a huge piece of glass sticking out of his head, and that he was still alive. But I just thought that was really sort of tense, and you're like going, of all of them, don't let Tom kind of get sort of wiped out in this moment. And so I just thought that was just really good. It felt tense. It felt the whole Kraft family was in jeopardy here, with all that brawling happening around and about their car. I thought it was really good.
Also, Frank's scream that would make me lurch as well. We did get one piece of confirmation that no matter if you see one or the other of the Magdas, you will not be able to tell them apart. Because Dr. Kraft has Rio on his hood of his car screaming at him. You would assume, if it wasn't completely different, they'd be like, oh no, what's happening? Like, she looks like you, but slightly Spanish, but you're German. Oh my God, maybe you have the same mother. Like, you would expect that. So this is kind of definitive confirmation that mortals.
I'm only saying no, Chris, because I had to watch it, because I was wondering what way they were going to manage it, because they didn't manage it at all, Maria. She sees them all separately, and they never managed her saying anything in the scene. It's really interesting. You see Dr. Kraft is leaning over the chair behind him as Rio's face appears in the window. And as she says, they're here, they're killing us, her face goes up above the window as Kraft turns back round. So there is a slight argument that he actually doesn't see her for a second. But I do think what we said in episode 8, that she is manifesting a different face in front of other people.
I think so.
I think that's what's happening. So you are right, I'd say. But I would say they also have an out as well. They can say, actually, if you see the two of them in the same situation together, you may be able to tell them apart. But actually, with everything that's going on, he's looking in different directions and may not have caught her face. In front of him. I'm not being pedantic. I just think it's really funny that they specifically made those choices because it gives them options. Let's say
exactly. That's the core because I don't like the whole they look different. I like that there's a bit more supernatural to it, and it's kind of like you just. No matter, even though they look the same, you see them different. Not see them differently. You can't put them together.
Yeah.
But I like the fact that if you saw two of them together, you knew something was up. And then that this is as you said, this is the out that I didn't take it in that way, but I prefer your view on how it might be an out.
Yeah, I just think it's really fun. And I do think the idea, even just having the three of them communicate to each other, because you see Rio looking at Elsa gives a quick nod back, quick nod from Rio, and then Elsa looks up in the rearview mirror and gives a quick nod to Frank before he screams. So there is that actual communication between them. So that tells you that it's not just, let's say, one being that's able to just doesn't need to see each other. It's actually three individual beings that all have a way of that all kind of need to communicate to each other. They can't just telepathically say what's next, or maybe they are saying telepathically, but they do need to make some form of connection between each other to tell each other what to do. But they're all one being spread out completely separately, living separate lives, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. But I still think it's the case that people can't tell them that they're the same.
Yeah.
And it's only because Maria has got this heightened sense of spirituality and supernatural, tapped into that supernatural, side of things, that she's able to sense an evil. So, I absolutely think that's the case.
Yeah.
And that's why she's not, she can't say definitively that Elsa is Magda, who she saw on the thing, or Rio from when she went to go and see Mateo. And it's the same why, Dr. Kraft possibly was doing that. But it's that even if he did see his, Elsa next to him and then saw Rio he would not be able to tell.
Yeah.
So I think that's definitely, that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah.
I think,
I will give John Logan this. I do like the preceding story of how they're pushing Kraft.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll let John do the next few bits, but I will tip my hat where it is due. I did not know where they were going with this.
Chris is not wearing a hat again. He always tips his hat when he's not wearing a hat.
I always tip my hat when I'm not wearing. I tip my virtual hat. I take it off and even bow slightly. It's interesting how they push Kraft in this, because it's not 100% planned, but they found his one weak point. Mm-hmm. And that's the interesting part of how it pushes him. Sorry, but John, I'll let you explain that part.
I think that's it. I think that fallout then from Tom's injury, and I think it's just that conversation with, between Peter and Tom, and, you know how much he cares for his children here in this moment. Tom is massively upset and he just goes, I hate them. And he's like, no, you don't hate them. And we have this really kind of nice father-son, sort of chat about, not to allow hatred to come into your heart, because then you're lost. That's all you'll ever do. And then, he wants to protect his children from just hating. And then you have that conversation with Elsa, where that's where she manipulates it around his kids and starts to, she pushes it, pulls back. I love the kind of fluidity of Elsa, in how she approaches Peter. And that maybe is because he's the more difficult nut to crack, possibly. But, she starts off about saying, this is a race war. We need to be on the side of the Aryans, not the Mongols, really up front, in your face. And that doesn't wash with him. He talks about the Hitler Youth and just seeing hatred in their eye. And he doesn't want Tom and Trevor or any of it, even Frank, to fall into just hating as a way in which you do things. Yeah. And then she immediately sort of stops and says, I don't want them to hate either, but I need the family to be strong and to be protected, and then brings her story of what she was enduring when she was leaving Europe at the hands of American soldiers. And it's that whole thing that you see Peter then contemplating his position. She gives the Heil Hitler salute as well, but you then have him at his desk in his study contemplating all of this as he's putting on the Iron Cross. And ultimately sort of breaking down after he's done the Nazi salute. He's effectively being pushed in this to kind of show strength or appear to be strong for his family. Or, and we don't know this, it could as well equally be that to protect his family again by a lot of, it's that idea, as we're hearing now, about, well, it's time to speak up. And a lot of people didn't speak up, and a lot of people haven't spoken up about racism in current societies. And part of that was to effectively go along with it. People would give the Nazi salute and maybe just did not believe that politics at all, but it enabled them to gain power and to make things fanatical within the society to really violent and bloody extremes. It's difficult.
And they're just as complicit and just as responsible.
Exactly. So it's seeing what, again, I think this is probably for a season 2. Where is this for Peter? Is he's presumably, is he just doing it to placate Elsa, which is just as bad? Is it to protect his family, which, isn't much better? Or is he kind of going full on and embracing his Krupp family heritage, I suppose?
Well, so the interesting part is he does the salute, but breaks down before he says the words. And that's the cliffhanger, if you will, for the Krupp Craft discussion.
Agreed.
Because if he had have done the full salute and given the Heil, that for me implies that he's bought in, he's gonna do this. The fact that he starts breaking down while doing the salute, I believe leaves enough questions if they get to season 2 and this is their story. Then I think that leaves enough in well, maybe he's not going to. If they want to do anything with Kraft, he may become something similar, which is he'll start speaking out for no hate. It's like, if they want to do a redemption part of it, just because they didn't give him the Heil. If they had have done the Heil, that's the descent.
Well, he's in a room on his own, and I think he's trying it out. I think he's testing it out.
And
seeing
doesn't
if he
like
can,
it.
and he doesn't like it at all. So that does give them the opportunity next season. Very likely that Rory Kinnear will return for a second season. It's very likely that the character would have a massive storyline. He's obviously been in the other 3 seasons of the show as well. So, so the choice will still be there, I think, at the beginning of the next season. Whether he will follow the path that's being forced on him effectively to make his family strong, as Elsa says, or whether he will push back even further against what her beliefs are. So I think it's just an interesting little touch there that he also has the Iron Cross on him, effectively remembering those times and the reasons why he left his family and reasons why he left Germany and everything like that. So it's just an interesting moment, I suppose, to have him kind of go through that experience. but I don't think any definitive decision has been made by Peter Craft as to what he's going to do.
Exactly. The question really for season 2 is, does he double down on Rio's words, this isn't the time for peacemakers, and that's what he's decided? Or is he the retort to that, which is, there is time for peacemakers, and he plays he's the fly in the ointment, or, he's the spy in the bunt, or something along those lines, which would be kind of really, really interesting. Yeah. So, and again, as you say, the Iron Cross thing, it's a nice indication of his background. He's obviously done something fairly, brave in the line of duty, to get that.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we go on to the next point, I know we've gone back and forth over the season really on the Magdas and which ones are interesting and enjoyable storylines and stuff. Elsa is the one I'm really beginning to hate, because some of the stories, let's say, because some of the stories that she chooses to tell Peter to manipulate him are absolutely horrific stories. And you're seeing her break down, you're seeing her cry, and she's telling these stories. And in the back of my mind the whole time, I'm going, but this didn't happen. You're making this up just to manipulate him. Yeah. And it's really horrific. Like even the things that Alex has said in the past to Lewis when she was trying to convince him that she'll work on his side in the mayor's office or in Townsend's office, even those stories didn't seem as despicable as the ones that are being made up here by Elsa to manipulate Peter Craft. Anybody who's told those kinds of stories will want to help out the person that was subject to the indignation that she went through. Anybody would feel that way. It just is that they're really, really horrific stories that she seems to come up with to manipulate them. So this particular personal manipulation that's going on between these characters, as opposed to, someone that's like Rio, who's trying to bring Mateo to become the leader of an organization that's going to cause a war basically in the city of LA, or Townsend who's going to become a massively powerful person in the city, or, the work that maybe she's been doing with the Nazis in LA. All of those are massive organizations. What you have here is Peter Craft, a doctor who moved over from Germany, left the army and doesn't want to be a Nazi effectively. And he's being manipulated by these awful stories, awful tales. So I think she's the one I dislike most of all of the three. Yeah,
definitely. For me, it's basically I hate her most, followed by I would never be stuck in a room with Frank, or I would end up killing him. And then
or yourself.
Or myself. Then I'd go Rio just because of the slight manipulation. And then I still just don't know.
I suppose with Alex, that's her job, is to be a political advisor.
Exactly.
It's almost like you kind of feel she's doing nothing wrong other than doing what political advisors do.
Yeah.
Exactly. I pretty much am sure there are Alexes all over the White House and every government right now. It's just like you expect that level of snivelry, kind of conniving. She hasn't done anything bar work with the Nazis, and a lot of people were doing it.
Videotape him having sex to use that in a future.
Pretty sure that's probably happening now with the political space.
She gets her boss a sausage breakfast. What's not to like?
Exactly, and we all like sausages, be it bratwursts or links. Moving swiftly on and discussing our bratwursts and our links and other phallic shaped discussion point. Let's move on to my main point.
Rockets.
I want to talk about rockets. Exactly. Does Brian have a rocket in his pocket? No, because it is the end of his rocket journey. Wow. I did not see this ending with Brian happening. Again, the one thing I will say is I said in the last episode, I was expecting certain zigs and they gave me a zag, and I enjoy that. I know it's basically, if any of our fellow listeners have listened to me over our 490 something episodes, it's
not difficult to remember 499, Chris. Our 500th episode is next week.
I haven't been on all 499.
Yeah, you're still part of the team.
490 show. I hate cliches. I was expecting, based on that they had potentially played with the timeline slightly with their version of the beginning of the Zoot Suit riots, I was like, okay, so Brian we get Brian in, and I'm going to jump around a bit on this slightly, but Brian, essentially, I was like, okay, they're going to make him a proxy Oppenheimer.
Okay.
For those of our listeners who don't know who Oppenheimer was the father of the atomic weapon. He is the person who said, I am Shiva, I am the destroyer of worlds, as they launched the first nuke. He is basically was the lead scientist of the Manhattan Project, which was the US project to build the atomic weapon. I thought they were going to do, when Brian starts talking about he has ideas for a bomb and they're taking him to Manhattan and New York, I was going, okay, they're going to drop his birth name was his mother's maiden name was Oppenheimer or something along those effects. I thought they were just going to build it like that. I was like, that would be quite cool. Okay. What we get here is we had already seen that Lewis was teaming up with the mafia to store Brian in Mama Vega's house. We get this beautiful scene between the mob boss and Mama Vega about her recipes, and we even get Dottie, and we get some nice end closure there, which I was quite happy with. And straight away we even see the Nazis figure out, oh well, if it's not here, here, and here, and here, well, it's all about family with the Jews. So his cop partner is slightly his family. Go check there. Yeah. Go check the like, you could see the pieces, and it was just nicely threaded.
They're very, very quick to guess that, aren't they? Yeah.
Yes.
But they're good at their jobs, so yeah.
Exactly. If I was Gestapo, and I was high in Gestapo, I'd probably be good at my job too. But
you're not Gestapo, Chris.
I am not Gestapo. For the record, and for audio listeners, I am not Gestapo. I do a terrible German accent.
Very true.
I cannot be German. Anyway, jumping forward, what I liked is this scene, and I the rest of it's all just very setting the stage in terms of some nice goodbyes, some nice scenes in between where they discuss how they're going to get him over to the East Coast, all leading to the scene in the car where we have Brian talking about his ideas, where we have Tiago and Michner and Betty Berman in there with Brian. And they're all looking at each other, and they're all starting to figure out together, like, this kid is a loose cannon.
Yeah, or a loose rocket.
He is literally potentially talking about blowing up the world. Who knows? And you see the threads and the nods between them. And when they start to talk about, and we have the Gestapo trailing them, and I wasn't sure how it was all going to play. I was like, oh, we're going to get to a plane, and then the Gestapo are going to shoot Brian as he gets on, or he's going to hand. I was trying to play the pieces together and go, how are they? And then as soon as they pull over the car, and you see Michner go for the walk with him, and you see, hey kid, look at the sky, look at those stars, they're amazing, and that whole scene. And again, I'm going to pontificate how amazing Nathan Lane is. I'm going to wax lyrical for as long as possible, but like that scene where you see him as a cop, as a Jew, as a man trying to save America, as trying to stop the Nazis, you see all these conflicting emotions, and it's that kind of Sophie's choice he's been given, which is, do I save a child, in his eyes, a kid, a kid, or do I save the world? By eliminating this threat.
Yeah, it's the whole idea of what would you do? And could you do it if it was effectively what Lewis does here? Because I'm totally with you. This to me was the most unexpected and shocking part of it, and I thought it played out really well.
Yeah. I thought the second he started talking about the fact that he was done with the rocket and the other thing he was working on, the second I heard that, I went, oh, I should have put that together last week. He's working on the atomic bomb. He needs to die. The whole conversation that's going on in the car is keeping him away from Hitler. If Hitler gets this kid, they're going to be able to exploit him to learn how to build a rocket, and that rocket might reach New York. And once he starts talking about the idea that he's going to be able to set fire to the atmosphere and create a nuclear bomb, this kid is more dangerous than Hitler, because he doesn't care about the consequences. What he's there for is the science, and to be able to do it sounds like the thing that will entice him to just keep pushing himself until he gets it done, and he doesn't care about the consequences. That's the moment when they all realize that he needs to go. And I love that kind of silent, again, this episode is a lot about the nods between characters. There's that silent moment of acceptance between everybody in that car that Lewis is the one that's going to do it, and that he has to go. I did also like, just a little tiny thing I liked as well, was this felt like the smuggling network that was going on, taking Jews particularly out of Germany and out of areas where they were in constant danger. It felt like they were using this mafia network to help Brian escape from LA. You know, it really felt like, oh great, right, we're going to get Brian in season 2. He's going to be working with the Jewish community in New York, fighting against the Nazis from America, you know, with all of his ideas and all of his plans. But yeah, I definitely saw that moment when he started talking, the way he was looking out the window when Lewis was questioning him about this horrible plan that he had. I knew that was the end of Brian from there.
Yeah, I think that's what's really good is it's how, in many respects, it's just that sheer, the nonchalance or the abstractness of the scientific speak that Brian is talking in. So he talks about yield, and he's like, oh no, that's just the scientific word for explosion, the explosive load from it. And he then starts to talk about it, you know, as, I haven't figured out yet whether the Earth's atmosphere will burn up or not. And you can just see it on Benny's face. And it's not just about what he's saying about, well, the water and the soil will be sorted by the radiation and it will take out a city, which is horrific enough, I suppose, for Benny, Tiago, and Lewis. But it's the realization that this is exploring the boundaries of science in a totally abstract way, but it has a real life consequence or application, which is a bomb. And yeah, not to give the Nazis on. I think what makes it so poignant as well, for me anyway, is that you know how important family, tradition, and everything like that is to Louis Michner, and to Tiago and all that. And yet then it's the contrast of what, and the conflict and the pain that it inflicts on Louis in that moonlight on the beach to shoot Brian and kill him. Yeah. And I think that's really interesting. You know, it's that thing of, in war, good people have to do bad things, and it's normally only post that, in retrospect, that you can say whether potentially it may have been good or for worse. But this is a moment where it's almost like time travel in that sense.
It's the do you kill Hitler question,
exactly,
basically.
And it's simply that this bomb that he's describing to them cannot get into the hands of the Nazis.
Yeah. Now, the fallout potentially of this in the next season is fantastic. You have Michner in the pocket of Benny, the mafia, they owe him. You have Dottie, which is the interesting part.
That's
Dottie
true.
was friends with Brian. She got him the Yoo-hoo for his journey. She joked with him. She started to very much bond with this kid. And then at some point, well, we don't know when Michner's going to tell her or how he tells her at the end of this episode or before, or in the next season. There's going to be some type of, but you don't get it, Dottie. He was too much of a risk type thing. And then that's an interesting bit, because when you're talking about necessary evils, every character who goes through a necessary evil, there will always be some other character who thinks they know better and that they shouldn't have.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe, but remember, Dottie was the one that found out that he was working on some other project. So I think she also had that look on her face. She didn't find out what the other project was last episode, but she had a look at her face going, hang on a second, what's the other project thing that this kid's talking about? So I think she is a person that understands casualties of war, and I think she'd probably understand pretty quickly why Brian had to go. I don't know whether it will play a big part in season 2 for that particular element.
No, I
but
think it would be a bit of a fall.
I do think certainly Lewis being the one to kill him, that will have a major implication on his own psyche as we get into season 2.
Yeah. I think the other thing I loved about this is, as you were saying about with Mama Vega, I like that juxtaposition of kind of that lightheartedness. It almost like, right, we've got to whisk him away now. It's by plane to somewhere in the Caribbean and then on to New York. Mm-hmm. I really kind of like that playfulness, but the juxtaposition with ultimately what happens to Brian, like just Benny Berman, Tiago, and Lewis, where Tiago's like going, "Why are you in my house? I want to word with you out here." Whereas Benny is kind of more interested in this recipe that he's making at the moment, and Mama Vega is really happy to do it. It just feels, it's a nice kind of lightness to a really tough ending, but it sets up that theme, I think, of the family tradition, food recipes, all in that vein that Lewis, I suppose, connects to, and then ultimately what he's got to do to poor old Brian.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, look, we'll kind of wrap it up there, because I want to move on to some other bits. I will say, and we can talk further about it after the next point, is that I do feel poor Mama Vega was not used correctly in this episode, and we will get to that later. Put a pin in that. Okay.
Yeah, let's move on to the final point for this episode, my final major point of the episode, and obviously is the death of Sister Molly, which in itself was kind of a shock. We had the fight between herself and Tiago, where Tiago's pushing her away. Kind of surprised that resolved itself in that conversation, because he seemed quite adamant that was the end of their relationship. He was no longer going to be her Latin lover, as he describes, she stays behind after he leaves. I think that's an indication that she does believe that there's no future in their relationship. He has to go outside to meet Lewis, and instead of going down with him, she says, "Can you give me a couple of minutes to wait behind?" and then follows down afterwards. I think that's her basically saying, "I completely take your point about the two of us holding hands in the street. That's not going to look well. I believe it so much, I'm not even going to leave the building with you," basically, is the way that I took that little scene there. But I was quite surprised it resolved the argument there, and they said they were going to meet up later on after the service. But really what's important about the episode is that we finally get the answer to who killed the Haslett family and why. We predicted it from episode 2, I think, from the introduction of Miss Adelaide. Interesting that was the central mystery for the whole series. And I think everybody pretty much knew that it had to be her mother that did it. But it's the fact that Molly didn't know. The fact that Molly wasn't aware that her mother was willing to do this extreme an act to protect her daughter and protect the church effectively. So what is also interesting, and just a nice little touch, I remember this from when we were watching Gotham to begin with, when there was the murder of the Wayne family, and they kept going, "I did it, but somebody else is involved. I did it, and somebody else is in the background." Here we hear from Miss Adelaide she had help because an old woman like her couldn't possibly actually do the murders. So she initiated it, someone else helped. Most likely the Nazis staged it, but maybe not. Maybe somebody else is involved. So I do like that. The central mystery is resolved. She was the one responsible for it. She did it because of Molly, but there is somebody else involved that could play into the future investigation, I suppose, that may happen as we get on to the next season.
I do believe it was Zika Stapo.
It may have been Kurt. It may have been Kurt.
I think they'll bounce it between Kurt and the bodyguard, and it's like, which one was it? Which one was it? And it will be Kurt will potentially, probably in a lover's tryst or something with Townsend, spill that remember there was the whole piece around death. You don't want to kill, you can't take that back. Yeah. And the fact that Kurt had to kill children, which remember it was the Haslett family, I think that may come out in season 2, and that's how they'll have a nice coup d'etat between Kurt, Townsend, and potentially Adelaide.
Maybe
fracturing there.
Yeah, I think the only reason why I have a question over who else was involved is because of the staging of the murder itself. Certainly, you get Kurt to go out and shoot a few people in the head and bury their bodies in up the mountains. Grand. I just wonder if there's something else about the other person involved may have had more of a reason to stage it the way they did as well. So, because the staging was quite important at the beginning of the season. So, but good that we have the resolution to it. And what it leads to, I think, is quite massive. Molly taking her own life because she feels there's no way out of this church. Her mother kind of says to her, right, go downstairs, give us a nice song. And when you come back, I never want to hear another word about you leaving this church again. Look what I've done for you. Look at all the things I will do for you in future. And that's Molly's cue to realize she'll never get out of this. There's no way out of it. And that's when she kills herself in the baptismal pool of the church. So much great symbolism that's going on in that scene as well. A beautiful scene with Santa Marta coming to hug her and bring her to death.
Poke out her eye.
And possibly poke out her eye, as Chris mentioned earlier on. She really struck me as the character of Death, the way it's written within Sandman. I know you guys have read a bit of Sandman, but Death as a character is the personality that you want to see ushering you into the next phase of your afterlife, effectively, whatever that may be. It may be just you're dead and over and that's it, or it may be that you're going on to heaven or you're going to wherever else afterwards. But Death is a personification of what you want to see to welcome you after you die. And I really like that moment with Santa Marta where she kind of repeats this conversation that Molly has had with Tiago earlier on about the fact that she always wanted a sister. She always wanted someone to share her bedroom with and share her life with. And she talks to her about the bunk beds and says that she's her sister. In that moment at the end of her life, you know, I thought this was a nice little touch between them as she welcomes her into the world. She smiles and takes her on board. She now cares for her because she's no longer one of the living. She's now one of her community, one of the dead, effectively. So, I do really like that.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on that. Like, I was always slightly a bit more confused about Santa Muerte. I thought she was more like the ferryman or of the dead to a degree. But what we see is, as you say, it's also very Sandman-esque in that, yes, she is the ferry woman, ferryman of the dead who brings them to the afterlife. But does it, like you said, with that personification and that understanding, and it's like, come with me, sister.
Yeah.
You brought up a point before we came up on air.
I was going to bring it up again.
I think you should, because I want to talk about this.
I was going to bring up just one thing about that conversation. I really liked my understanding of it, I suppose, that this was a conversation where Santa Muerte is welcoming Sister Molly into the afterlife. What I didn't like about that scene was that it could have been taken that there was something extra supernatural about it.
Yep.
That effectively Sister Molly was kind of joining the sisterhood that is Magda, Santa Muerte, and now Sister Molly. That the three of them were going to suddenly become deities presiding over what's going on in the world, because there's just not enough set up there. If that's what was meant, there's not enough setups as to what Sister Molly would be the personification for, if that makes sense. I do think there's a spiritual connection between them. I totally get that there's a connection between their spirits, I suppose, but I just can't imagine that we will see Sister Molly appear in the same way as Magda or Santa Muerte next season. But maybe we will. We did have that conversation with Tiago where he says on Day of the Dead, we say farewell and say thanks to our loved ones who've passed, and sometimes they reach back out to us. So perhaps we will see Santa Muerte in that way, as a ghost, possibly in some sense in season 2. I just don't see her as a deity in season 2. And I think that particular line of dialogue made it sound like she was joining the sisterhood of deities, basically. So
I'm right there with you on this, because I literally had to have this conversation with my partner after this, because she was like, What do you mean? Is she now a god? Was she a god? And I'm like, no, do you not remember? She talked about her sisters, blah, blah, blah. But I think more that they will potentially go along the lines of, as you said, Tiago or someone, potentially Josefina, will actually be able to commune with Molly in her post-life machinations, if you will. It just confused. It made poignant sense based on the story and the narrative they'd just given, but there wasn't enough of it wasn't given enough, kind of like if it had been a bit more hammered home, it was just more of those because the two times this conversation came up, which was first with Tiago and then the siblings being brought up by the mother, there was so much else going on in those small bits of narrative, those conversations, that it wasn't the most important piece of those.
Yeah.
So it was a kind of blink and you'll miss it sentences, important, but then to be narratively referred back to later, it was just, I can see people going, wait, was she supernatural? Is she going to be supernatural? Exactly. And I'm like, to be fair, it gives John Logan an amazing opportunity.
Maybe.
Because he could go, well, she wasn't, she's going to.
Yeah.
Or, no, she wasn't, it was talking about a thing. Or, well, she's not, but she now is going to be she's going to be a demi-deity, and she'll be a bit of a ghost and be able to talk to blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, perhaps. I think it's one of those things that the element I don't like about it is that these two conversations happened in the same episode. They probably do have to so that you can remember them, as you mentioned, but having the conversation with Tiago that I always wanted a sister, I wanted to let her choose her bunk bed, all that kind of stuff in the episode, and then having her have that conversation with Santa Marta a couple of minutes later makes you feel, did you always want a sister, or did they need you to say that in this episode so that scene makes sense later on? You know, exactly. She had that conversation with Tiago about him losing family members when they first had their first date back on the beach back in episode 3. That would be a great opportunity to say, you have a big family, I wish I had a big family, so they can kind of share that back then. And then it becomes a narrative theme throughout the series that she's alone. She has always been alone with her mother. And then when it comes to the end here, she's being welcomed into the afterlife by her new, by somebody else, by somebody that's referring to herself as now part of their family, the family of the dead, effectively. But I just feel having those two lines in this episode just felt a little bit like we need to get that story told now really quickly, you know?
So one very small bit similar in vein to this for me was the scars, the main plot device. John reminded me when we were just off air that this had been mentioned previously, but not, again, it was mentioned so quickly in passing and not really something that I kind of took in, that I knew she had tried to quote unquote escape, but I didn't understand the significance of that trying to escape. So it felt like in this, she talked about her scars to Tiago, showed her mum her scars, and used it. So it was just, it felt, what I like what they did with this, with Molly, it felt rushed to a degree with me. It just felt a bit bum, bum, bum for both aspects. So it's like sisters, bum, 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 scars, bum, bum, bum. And to get us to that end scene or end goal. I don't know. I just think they could have stretched it a bit further and elaborated, but overall, quite a nice fitting end. And I mean, this is a very bad way of describing it. I was very happy with how they ended this story beat with the character that is Molly.
Yeah. It is a really sad end to the character, and there has been such a central kind of interesting point for all of us all the way throughout the season. We've been wondering whether, you know, was Molly the personification of Santa Marta on Earth, or Magda on Earth, or did she have some other connection that, you know, was she channeling some kind of demon? What was going on? Was she the one that murdered the Haslets? And to have it end the way it does here, where she finds out about what her mother does to protect her, and causing her own death, causing her suicide. It's a really sad end for the character, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I loved it personally. I agree absolutely that the whole thing of Tiago and her sort of connecting back so quickly, but I felt that was a lash out. But I think like she teased it up really nicely. Can't you see the cracks? They hate each other now, referring to both Molly and then Sister Molly. And so when it comes to, you know, and I just think what we're getting with the comments of her other sisters, her 4 sisters, and the confirmation then of the marks on her wrist is stuff that has kind of been obliquely referenced, that she is cracked. She is torn. And that all comes to play here with her mother, which is just phenomenal. I thought this scene was amazing, to be honest, between Molly and Miss Adelaide, where you have Molly stamping her foot, putting her foot down, and really then Miss Adelaide saying that, I've tried so hard to protect you. I've done everything to protect you. It comes out about the Haslets, and she goes, whatever you do, wherever you go, you are mine. And in respect to the Haslets, this whole idea, I became God's righteous minister of death. And so tough, so dark and tough, basically not giving Molly this option. And then seeing Miss Adelaide running into the pool with the grief. I mean, Amy, Madigan, is just really phenomenal here, in terms of that personal loss with Molly, in her own blood in the baptism pool, and literally the scene, 30 minutes before in the private chambers of Molly, where she admits to murder, all to protect her and the ministry, as well as what she's built. And I think just knowing that Molly didn't know that is really really good. Yeah. I just thought that was phenomenal. And I think again, just Santa Muerta there was great, and knowing about the kids and that sister, it's obviously that reference to her sisters and that idea of, being the form of death that Molly wants to come for her. But I kind of like the idea that in some ways Molly's still hanging around. I don't mean in any big way, but certainly this idea that there would be signs or something to whether it's Josefina, I don't know, could be really good, because even with Josefina, I think we kind of get to a point where she's like, and she thought that the temple was going to be where she could develop and be free of all the crap that's going on that she's seeing now with the curfew and the cops and all this, and she's realized that actually probably none. There's that really nice scene with Maria and Josefina then, which is obviously so very different to Molly and Miss Adelaide. And certainly the moment where she goes, I told you that story where you would always be safe. Well, you're not. It's like fairly brutally honest, really. And there's actually some really nice intimate moments though between the parent and their child here, from Peter and Tom, and then Maria and Josefina, and then even with Miss Adelaide and Molly, intimate and have very different thrusts. So yeah, I thought this was like really good. Again, like with Brian's, it was just a nice surprise, and maybe that was because we were saying she's been communing with Santa Muerta most, we were wanting that supernatural element, and in the end it was just that she was a young girl brought into something with no choice, and ultimately being innocent to the fact that her mother was a monster. And that was the cruelty of her position.
Absolutely. It does lead on to Tiago at Day of the Dead, effectively, and how much everything's hitting him. I did like that they still showed the representation of what Day of the Dead means to a Mexican family, and a Latino family in America celebrating it, because it is a celebration exactly as Tiago describes. I really enjoyed seeing the family actually having part of their celebration still, even though Tiago's very soon after the death of Molly, so he's experiencing still the massive grief that there is there for losing his girlfriend. But I like that we saw a moment between Tiago and his mother dancing again together, something that we saw back at the first episode of the show, the closeness of the family, where they will dance and they will celebrate when these types of occasions come up. I thought it was a lovely scene, but he does get the tap on the shoulder from Magda, and I thought I liked the touch of it, because it's almost like she acts out exactly how Maria had described her. Maria says that she can feel the touch of Magda in a room. She can feel that creepiness of having Magda nearby. And what Magda does is rub right along the neck of Tiago to get his attention effectively, which I did really like. John, did you think this was kind of an opening, or Chris, did you think this was kind of the opening for Magda to now talk to Tiago because of everything that he's gone through, that she now thinks he's possibly someone that she can use or can get involved with?
I think Magda's a pragmatist, absolutely, and she will work with anyone to further her agenda. And if that means that she's using Tiago, and that's the thing that I'm not entirely clear here, is it that she's taken the opportunity in a bit the same way that Alex connected in with Lewis at the City Hall? And okay, nothing more came of that, but it's almost like a spy in the opposing camp, to feed disinformation or channel them along ways that ultimately serve her purpose. So is that what this is? Or is it something that and this is why I think the gravitas of it being at his father's grave in the cemetery on Day of the Dead. And I just feel that the things that happened to Tiago in this episode with the realization of effectively just being is always going to be and will always be seen as a Mexican as opposed to a detective or a husband or a father. And that makes it difficult, impossible with Molly, that fracture, even though they come back and then she's killed, after it's, the last episode was the high before the fall. Absolutely. And is it that he falls so far and you have this moment? And of course, it keeps us guessing because it's held away from us. So we don't know. But that could then be where he's willing to work with her. Or something along those lines, or be involved with her plans, to some, in a way that is for his own need. I don't really know, but I think that's what's so great about the show and about this ending is that it does leave you on a bit of a cliffhanger because, the only thing I'd say is the brother killing, brother is probably not going to sit too well with him knowing that he's got two brothers if he takes it literally. But I think, I don't know. It's one of those two things. So I would kind of like to see Tiago go dark. I think John Logan has form with having good characters who always can be on the cusp of going evil. Like Vanessa Ives from season 1.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I personally think that this is and I'm going to keep this very short, that he is now opened to the whispers. Whereas if before he was almost not a holier than thou, he was the good cop. He was the good son. He was the good Mexican. He was the good everything. This is him accepting reality, and through that acceptance, and through the acceptance of the things he has to do, he is opening himself up to the whispers of Magda, or the allowance that Magda can now whisper to him. And she can now set him through what she wants to do, because you think most of her stuff was done with the Pachucos, it was done with the Nazis, her characters. So this allows her to open up, like potentially season 2 has another form of Magda where it is someone who Tiago falls in love with, and it's her job to push Tiago towards X. He's open, the gates are open, and it allows that to be, I don't want to say anti-hero, because it's not vigilanteism for good sake. It will be vigilanteism and anti-hero-ness, but actually better serving the actual bad person, the evil entity. Right. He'll think he's doing the right thing, but it's actually serving the prophecy of brother versus brother, nation versus nation, etc., etc.
Does Tiago see Magda at all?
He felt her. He shivers when she runs the finger down the spine. Yeah.
I think he senses for sure, but he's not seen her.
Yeah.
He's not seen her because his back was to her.
Exactly. So he doesn't answer the question because he doesn't hear the statement that she's saying to him. She's saying, effectively, it's going to come down to you, Tiago Vega. So that's the way I'm taking it, because at the beginning of the season, he's been touched by Santa Muerte. He's under the protection of Santa Muerte, and Magda's coming here at the end of the season. I liked how John Logan described this in his interview about this final episode. He said, these are your two main characters for the show. Magda and Tiago are character number 1 and character number 2 for this entire series, and they've never met. They haven't met since the beginning of the season. There's been no interactions between these two main characters. So at the end of the season here, she's now saying, I'm coming for you next, basically. I'm coming to either get you involved or you will be involved in the center of this maelstrom that's coming because of all the things that she's been doing. So yeah, I liked the idea, but I took it that she wasn't talking to him. She isn't whispering to him. She's whispering about him behind his back in his presence, basically.
I like what you said about the touched. In the beginning, he was touched by Santa Muerte. In my opinion, at the end now, he is touched by Magda. If you want to call it, it's Magda versus Santa Muerte for the Battle of Tiago.
Maybe.
If you will. He is the linchpin, the crux, the fulcrum, whatever you want to call it. Will he lean doing bad machinations for Magda, or will he do the virtuous kind of Santa Muerte route or the Coyote route, and kind of like, will he be good or will he be bad? Well, like, he is the center point, and I like that, and it's perfect because it questions exactly what will happen in season 2.
Yeah. Let's hope there is a season 2. We've talked a lot about the possibilities of what's going on and what could happen in a season 2. I was going to have a point in here where we talked about what our impressions were going to be in season 2. We're going to do a wrap-up episode about the full season of Penny Dreadful, as I mentioned earlier on. So let's save our thoughts about what might happen in season 2. Any notes of the dead for this episode? Anything that popped out from the episode that you thought might be interesting to bring in that we may not have talked about in the points for the episode? I'll go first because I just wanted to circle back to one of my notes that I mentioned really early on in the season about Sister Molly being based on Sister Amy Semple McPherson, who was pretty much exactly the same type of character in the 20s and 30s, right up until the 50s, actually, where she was a radio personality who was an evangelist, very much using all the entertainment industry standards to kind of get people as members of her church. The reason why I want to circle back to it was because I said there were some interesting things about her as a character that I thought might play into the season. And you guys were really intrigued about what it could possibly be, because there was just some interesting, odd parts about her life, I suppose. One of the most interesting is probably that she disappeared for 5 days, from LA, appeared in Mexico, 5 days later saying that she'd been kidnapped for those 5 days. And nobody believes that actually happened. People believe she used that to manipulate people around her to believe that she was treated badly so that she could encourage more people to join the church. It's just an interesting story because it could have been something that was going on with the Sister Molly character this season. I thought that they may play into her going and disappearing with Tiago at the end of this episode. That's what I thought was going to happen. She did die in the 50s, possibly of an overdose. Most likely it was ruled an accidental overdose of prescription drugs. But again, interesting that there's a connection there with suicide, possibly. There was some suspicions that it could have been suicide when she originally passed away. But then the other little touch that was taken for Molly's character is that when she died in reasonable poverty for what she was doing. She died with $10,000 to her name. Her mother, who was a member of the church but left after some major disagreements about how the church was being run. She had over $200,000 to her name, and the church itself was worth about $2.8 million. So certainly the church is very similar to the church we see involved with Sister Molly in this season. That's a very much run by the money and lots of money being involved in it. So I just thought it was quite interesting having those little touches, but I didn't want to break them really early on in the season because it may have ruined some of the storylines that were there for Sister Molly.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And certainly that she was kidnapped and was found up in Mexico. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty good. Yes. Or was she? Yeah, exactly. And some things around churches, I suppose, never change, do they?
Exactly.
I've just got a few notes. One on the Iron Cross, which was it's a military decoration, so it's just the idea that, you know, Peter is decorated very highly here with the Iron Cross. It's like the Victoria Cross in, say, in the UK. And it comes from the Napoleonic Wars when it was just Prussia and then later became part of the German Empire up to the end of World War One, when it was actually banned, and it was the Nazis brought it back, as their main sort of symbol and medal for, military, sort of valor, I suppose. But also because probably the design of the cross does hark back to, the Teutonic Order, and the Knights of the Crusaders, from, over the 13th, 12th, 11th centuries. And so that certainly fits in with, I suppose, the Nazis' kind of view of racial purity. But it's this, the design is ultimately, a Christian, cross symbol, or cross pate, of white or silver outline on a black cross, which was used by the Crusaders. So I thought that was kind of interesting, because it's not, as I say, it's that contemplation that Peter has. Mm-hmm. It's not a symbol of Nazism that he picks up. Yeah, exactly. It has been brought back as that sort of by 1938, but his is a World War One Iron Cross, effectively.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
The other thing was on the Zoot Suit riots, which I probably should have mentioned earlier, but it was interesting that kind of all related to the fears, hostilities around press coverage, actually, of the Sleepy Lagoon murder case, where it was this gang, about 9 teenage members of the gang accused of murdering this civilian man named Jose Diaz, so a Mexican, in an abandoned quarry pit. But the convictions of the 9 men, whilst they were ultimately overturned, it was just that generated so much animosity towards Mexican Americans from the police and the press, characterizing them as pachuco, hoodlums, and baby gangsters, basically.
Yeah,
so,
I want to see a baby gangster.
So it was kind of interesting, but it was pitted against American servicemen stationed in Southern California against Mexican American youths, or young, teenagers, young Mexican adults, from the injustice of what was being reported and how they were being viewed as a community.
And once again, convictions of them were overturned.
Exactly.
Very similar to the case in Central Park in New York, with the black youths who were accused of a crime they didn't commit and spent time in jail, and completely characterized by everybody, including Donald Trump, who was in New York at the time, as being murderers and killers.
Exactly.
So lots of little attention in there to the details of everything that's going on in the US.
The only other thing I have was to try and see if Brian Koenig was anyone in particular, and I do wonder whether his inspiration could be of a Caltech grad called Frank Molina, who, as a grad in Caltech, basically changed his research and asked his professor if he could do research into rocket propulsion and rocket technology and science, and ultimately he moved to the Arroyo Seco site, which was basically the basis for the Jet Propulsion Laboratory of NASA. But he became disillusioned with it because the research was for weapon systems rather than for scientific research, and so he left. But his interests in communism and left-wing politics brought the attention of the FBI, who thought that possibly he was exchanging information with the communists. So a bit kind of like the sense that Brian Koenig is in with giving information to the Nazis. Right. But in this case, maybe just the opposite is portrayed here, that he ultimately wanted to do jet propulsion for scientific research, not for weapon systems and the propulsion of bombs effectively.
Whereas
Brian has unfortunately slipped in the other way, but it probably isn't. But I just kind of thought, you know, with Brian getting taken out by Lewis, that was really interesting. I just wondered, you know, was he one of the huge number of scientists involved on the Manhattan Project? Given that he was coming up with the certain theories, and I just thought maybe let's just see if there were any missing students from Caltech in the 1930s. Right. And this isn't a missing student, but it threw up this character. So interesting in and of itself, but maybe could have been used as an inspiration for Brian.
Yeah, perhaps.
This is what happens when John goes down the rabbit hole on Google at like 11 p.m. at night. No, I'm only messing. This is cool. That's the thing. It seems like they took a lot of liberties with actual historical figures and historical events, but not in a bad way. They just
took inspiration.
Changed them. They took inspiration.
The interesting thing is him and his co-researchers were known as the Suicide Squad because of how dangerous their rocket experiments were, that they put themselves in so much danger that they were called the Suicide Squad.
There you go. One final note from me, just that beautiful song that's sung by Maria, and then eventually moves into the full version of the song Aurora Menino. This beautiful lullaby that she's singing to Josefina to comfort her. I just wanted to comment on the fact that it is actually connected in directly with what she says to Josefina beforehand. When Josefina realizes that even though she's joined the church, she's never going to be seen as anything different. Exactly the same way as Tiago realizing that by joining the police force, it doesn't make the world see him any differently. The line that Maria says to Josefina is, I told you that nothing would ever do you harm. I lied, basically. That is part of the actual lullaby that she's singing to Josefina. It actually ends with the line, there's nothing that will harm you, so sleep in my arms. So I kind of like that it's tied back in directly with Maria. It feels like something very natural for a mother to do. She's calming her down. She's saying, remember when you were young, I told you nothing could harm you. And then it reminds her of a lullaby that she would have sung to Josefina when she was young. So it's lovely. It's
really interesting, isn't it? Because it works quite nicely with Lewis and Brian in that Brian does not think that he needs to be afraid of Lewis. Mm-hmm. It's the Nazis. That, you know, Lewis is his comforting father figure in a sense, saying, we will protect you. Yeah. But he's not.
Exactly. Gentlemen, let's close out the episode. Let's find out what everybody thought overall of episode 10 of Penny Dreadful City of Angels. Chris, do you want to take us off? What did you think of the finale of this season?
If it is confirmed we get a season 2, then I am very happy for it. Because it did close some things, not in the way I wanted it, or not with the level of a bang and a gusto that I was expecting. It did leave a lot of questions for season 2 that I can see them answering there. If we do not get a season 2, then looking back on it, I will be not happy with this episode because it didn't close enough. There was if you look at it as a self-contained episode, if this was episode 8 or 5, if this was a 20 episode series and this was the midpoint, this is the end of, remember when shows used to go on that kind of midsummer arc or hiatus? Yeah. So this is the end of part 1 and we'll move into part 2 of the season. This would be a fantastic episode because it's setting some quick points. It's answering some things, beautifully done. Characters doing crazy things, not what you expect. But it felt somewhat rushed. And the biggest point to that is what we just discussed about Sister Molly and the sisters. That point being thrown and then scars, and it was just like boom, boom, boom. But we need to get to this end point, so we only have an hour. Let's get to it quickly. So I was happy-ish, I think is probably the best way I can say. And I'll form more cohesive thoughts as we kind of digest it and move into our kind of season wrap-up. And we discuss season 2. It all really, at the moment, this episode for me, and my like or dislike hinges on whether we get a season 2. Because if you look at this episode versus the finale of Watchmen, both trying to say potentially similar kind of overall topics, somewhat certain themes, they are two different beasts of how they handled the finale.
Absolutely, yeah. And remember, Watchmen was intended to be one season, and there's never been a suggestion this is only supposed to be one season. There's just a suggestion that it may not get renewed. That's a big difference between the two. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's always for a season one, you should always work under the assumption you won't get a season 2. And so you can lay small threads, but you cannot lay as much railroad on the assumption that the bridge is going to be there and get you onto the other side of the chasm. Okay. So let's see. So very much I'm unfortunately 50-50. It was beautifully shot. Well written in certain parts, just felt quite rushed, and it left one too many threads open for me. So yeah, that's my thoughts.
Interesting.
Mr. Harrison, what did you think of this final episode?
Yeah, I kind of have similar views to you. I think in discussing it more and really, watching it twice, discussing it now, I have changed. I was going to give it a 3.5, but there's more to this that I like than I did after I first watched it. I didn't really know how to process it, actually, after the first viewing of this, because a bit like yourself, Chris, I felt kind of a little cheated with Mateo. I felt there needed to be more there. I kind of thought there was going to be, and this is more to do with maybe how I've just been interpreting the season in terms of the supernatural. I kind of did want a big shindig a bit of Santa Muerta and Magda, and I was kind of rubbing my hands seeing Santa Muerta right at the start. I was like thinking, oh, here she is. But despite that, I thought the riot was really good. I think Brian and Molly, to me, those two elements of this, I really enjoyed, and I thought were actually quite emotional. And after discussing it now, I would give this 4 sausage breakfasts, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, out of 5, rather than the 3.5 sausage breakfasts, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, out of 5 that I was gonna give it.
Those 0.5 make all the difference.
Yeah, definitely. So I think overall I really did like this. As a Mateo, I thought Townsend's idea about having a 1,000-year reich was a bit on the nose, but I liked as you say, the zag and zig of Lewis and what he did to Brian. And I thought that was genuinely shocking. And I think it tied in really nicely, with, Maria and Josefina and a lot of parent-child, relationships going on here and the family, and just kind of the intrigue of, did he hear Magda? Did Tiago hear Magda or didn't he? Or did he sense her? Has he finally awakened to being in touch like his mother? His mother's always said he's special, he's been touched, but it's born out of, rather than protecting his father, it's been born out of a really tough day at the office over the last week, what with Molly dying and realizing that his co-workers or anyone, it's all against him and his family, his community. And I like that it ends with him and Lewis, I think, coming together again, or being together again. And I feel forming a similar, objective as to what they need to do in season 2. And to be almost like this, Tiago having learnt from Lewis what it is to do stuff sort of extracurricular, to being a detective. So I liked it. And I hope a season 2 comes. And I think it's certainly worth a few watches, to mull over some of the points of this for sure. So yeah, definitely. Derek, what did you think?
I didn't like this episode the first time I watched it at all. And the reason why was because I thought I knew what was going to happen. I thought I had an idea of everything, of the general movements of what was going to happen in the show. We've said before, we're not very good at predicting shows. But I felt it was getting to a point where had an idea of how the series was going to end. And because I was expecting it to go the way I thought it was going to go, I thought it was completely different, and I didn't like how they closed it off. But watching it the second time, I really enjoyed the episode. I really, really enjoyed it. Which is completely different. It's not how I would have expected. I think the reason particularly that I didn't like it first time was because the riot happened at the start, and it's a massive thing that happens, and all of those characters that are involved, and then they all disappear.
Yeah.
From that point onwards for the rest of the episode. Just to put a little underlining, neither you or Chris mentioned in your sum up the death of Fly Rico, a major character in the series. You both mentioned Brian and Molly's loss, but Fly Rico was massive in the series, and we saw no implications for his death at all. And I thought that was something that really needed to happen when I watched the episode the first time. But I do think this is 100% written on the understanding that this is going to get a second season. John Logan is really well respected at Showtime. He delivered the first 3 seasons of Penny Dreadful. From his discussions and his interviews, he says he's always been asked to come back from Showtime to deliver a show like that to them. I don't think he would have signed on for a 10 episode, one run season, in order to come back to television. He has a big movie career. He has a big stage. He writes lots of stage plays and does a lot of work on the stage. I don't think he would have come back to TV for anything less than a 2-season call. He's not allowed to announce it. I know that for definite. He's certainly been working on scripts to do a second season. And if you're doing it that way, there's not very many good shows that don't end their first season on a cliffhanger if they think they have a second season. I can't even think of one off the top of my head. Watchmen is the only recent one I remember seeing that had a definitive end with a tiny little cliffhanger to make up your own mind about what happened at the end of it. But everything we've watched that was the first season has ended with a massive cliffhanger at the end. The Boys last year, The Witcher this year, where all the characters only met in the last episode, leading on for your second season. Yeah. Everything we've watched that's been the first season that has ended with a lead into the next season. But it did answer all the questions that were set up from episode 1. Who were the Hazlitt murders? What was going on with the Nazis in LA? They are involved. The RS Echo motorway being built at the end of the series. All of those were the 3 big things that were set up at the beginning of the series, and now they've also set up. We have lots more to look forward to if we get a second season, which is, I think, the purpose of a first season is to go, hey, everybody, watch our show and come back next season, basically. So I think it did a great job, but didn't hit what I expected it to hit in the 10th episode of the season.
Yeah. I think, and we'll discuss it more next episode, I think my biggest fear is 2020.
Absolutely, yeah.
Everything you say is 100% true. Everything you say makes complete sense. The way this year is going, I can honestly see them going, do you know what, we probably can't film it, so you know what, that's the end of it. And I just think then that's a horrible what if.
Absolutely. But I don't think you can plan for 2020. I don't think anybody planned for 2020. So yeah.
Well, the Illuminati did, and the reptile people, but let's move on from that.
Thanks very much for that, guys. Let's move on to some feedback that we got. Our first piece of feedback came in by email from Jarrett Wilkins at feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com. He said, here's what I like about this final episode. We finally get to see 2 of Magda's incarnations in the same area as one another. Not only that, but they actually signal one another to cause the incident that leads to an all-out riot. I'm not certain if people don't recognize their similarities, or maybe they just don't wear Magda's face, but we as the viewer are at times aware of who she is and what her intentions are for the sake of dramatic irony. I wonder if next season we get to see how these personas of hers come into being. Maybe she studies the behavior and mannerisms of other people to sculpt the ideal persona, or maybe she just hunts for various women who look promising or have connections and abilities that she can work with, and then to take possession of their bodies. Also, how is Magda able to enter the cemetery? Like, how is she able to stand on hallowed ground? There are loads of interesting questions about Magda, actually, aren't there?
Yeah, that is. I mean, we saw her in a cemetery previously from the bus that Maria Vega was on.
Absolutely, yeah.
For sure.
Perhaps because both herself and Santa Muerta deal with the dead, maybe hallowed ground isn't the same thing for them. You know, maybe there's no relation between them and a cemetery being hallowed ground, potentially. But really interesting points there, Jared. I'm really intrigued about what we're going to see from that character in season 2 and what more they can pull out and what more ideas they can deal with the idea of Magda and the idea of what Natalie Dormer can do next season as well. I think she's been really interesting this season.
Yeah, definitely. I always thought that she hunted women. There's some kind of sort of empty corpse or something, you know, kind of like sort of a skin left as she's kind of consumed them. But certainly we know
supernatural over the last
it wasn't. Yeah, I know. Certainly, she is the biological T2 because she can separate and merge at will. So,
exactly.
Or whether she just forms that shape. But I had always thought that she would have a violent streak, so she hunts for the look. And that, we ultimately just see Natalie Dormer or Magda, as the audience, but then obviously other people aren't in the show.
Absolutely, yeah. No, very, very interesting. Jared continues, I think it's very clever writing that Magda was, by the end of the last episode, losing ground with all three of her marks. Dr. Kraft wouldn't take a charge against all the non-Germans, non-whites, and join the Nazi party. Councilman Townsend failed to get his father to back the motorway, and Mateo is welcoming back into the arms of his loving family in one singular motion, which unfortunately was the lynching of Tiago, which seemed to be part of her plan, but also far outside of her scope of events. She murders Fly Rico and hands the mantle of Pachuca leader to Mateo. She starts a riot that causes the police to enforce martial law and causes the rest of the city to fear the Chicanos, allowing Townsend to go ahead and building his motorway through Belvedere Heights. And she causes Dr. Kraft's family to be attacked by the Chicanos, setting him on a path to take up the Nazi party as a way of protecting his children from those he now fears. It is one very swift move from the alliance, but I think that's partially what it is. It is the kind of alliance of
the Empire.
Rio. Maybe the Empire too, but the alliance of Rio and Elsa and Frank all being in that one place at the one time almost made that sphere of influence even bigger than it had been when it's just her whispering in the ear of one person, basically. So it might be that again, there's so many things about her powers that we just don't know, but I just think the idea that all of them being in one location at one time feels epic, really.
Agreed.
Finally, Jared says, regarding Brian Koenig's end, I had a feeling that he wasn't going to live past the end of the season. I didn't think that it would be Lewis that would kill him, though. But I understand how he felt the necessity and his sense of duty to prevent Brian from becoming an early Oppenheimer. I love how it seems the director alluded to George's end at Lenny's hands from the book of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck when Lewis tells him to look up at the star. That was very poetic. Hope you guys enjoyed the season as much as I did, and I'll be back to contribute more thoughts to your wrap-up episode. Take care and stay healthy. P.S. If you had to share a bunk bed with your sibling, which bed would you choose?
Always choose the top.
Absolutely.
Because just remember, children are disgusting and pee falls down.
Well, that's the other thing. That's the thing. Hot air rises, so farts mean, okay, that you're gonna, but yeah, any leakage and then you're top bunk.
Wow. That's fascinating. Since neither of you did actually have bunk beds to share.
I did have a bunk bed.
With your family.
I had a bunk bed.
Did you?
I did. But it didn't have a bottom bunk. It was one of those ones that had the wardrobe, so you climbed up. It was like having a bunk bed, all right?
Kind of. It's sharing with
stop
a sibling.
ruining my childhood sleeping patterns. And the desk underneath and all that. But it like had the cubby hole at the back that you go and hide.
That's kind of cool. Yeah, that's kind of cool. It's not as cool as sharing a bunk bed like I did with two of my brothers at different times. I got the top bunk once and bottom bunk at another time. So I've done both.
And which would you prefer?
I was happy on both, actually, but when I was much younger, being on the upper bunk was better. I wouldn't really prefer either of them. I didn't mind either side. Just having a bed in a house of 7 people was good enough for me, to be honest. I eventually liked having my own bed, not the bunk bed.
So absolutely. So as you grow up, still top bunk, because if you threw up off the side of it from a lot of alcohol, it's in your brother's face.
There you go.
Perfect.
No, not my brothers. They would punch you quite heavily for that one.
So would mine, but nonetheless, yeah.
Thanks so much for that, Jared. That's really good of you to send in your feedback. Hopefully we'll hear from you on the next episode.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jared. Really good to get your thoughts there. Hope we've answered the bunk beds for you as well.
Yes. Cheers, Jared. And yeah, I'll share more of my bunk bed theories about liquid falling and hot air rising in our next episode of Bunk Beds.
Oh yeah, we should do a podcast, the Bunk Bed podcast.
Okay, let's see if that one lasts.
Let's see if that lasts. Exactly. Yeah, we also have some feedback over on our Twitter handle at TVPod Industries. First one from Terence. He goes, I really needed a box of Kleenex for the finale. Yes, it was. There were some sad moments. I think the whole Brian and Lewis thing, absolutely. And I even with Molly as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And finally, Anna as well. Our good friend Anna says, these final episodes, but particularly the last one, oof, my knees are buckling. So it really had an emotional hit, it seems like, for this final episode. Yeah. And it certainly pulls on some pretty sort of strong, themes of protection of parents or parent figure. You could argue with Lewis and Brian, and ultimately, that trust inherent within that. So it's kind of, it was a bit of a blubby one from here. And I actually also do, I keep sort of having to tell myself off that I'm not including Fly Rico in this, which is a real shame because he is such a great character.
Absolutely.
But thanks, Terence and Anna, for those tweets. Really good.
Yeah, really good to send them in.
Yes, thank you so much for all those tweets. And remember, if you want to get that feedback in, get it in soon, and all your thoughts on the whole season, because we want to hear you. We want to discuss it. But it's not going to be the next episode, because you know why? Episode 500 is coming. And you know what that means? It's time for a drink, because we gotta celebrate with pre-drink before we go into a 500th episode. So let's head over to the Penny Dreadful pub quiz.
Yes, and a little aperitif, I feel, at the Penny Dreadful pub quiz. It has been a tragic week. And not only do we need to spend it with dead people in the dead zone of the cemetery, with dead deities sort of tapping us and breathing on our necks, but we need to have a good bottle of tequila to really neck back to help us deal with this. So the Dreadful Pub Quiz this week comes from your local cemetery with a bottle of tequila. How about that? Never thought I would say that now. The question for episode 10 is, what sauce is Benny Berman cooking up at the Vega family residence? And what recipe does he promise to give to Mama Maria Vega? So yes, 2 food-related answers here. Just to go say that again, what sauce is Benny Berman cooking up at the Vega family residence? And what recipe does he promise to Mama Maria Vega as he leaves to ultimately take Brian to his death? Yes, that changes that kind of scene very differently. So yeah, answers on a postcard or by email, preferably to feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com. And you can start sending, if you decided to wait for this final one and send in all 10 answers for each of the 10 episodes, then you can do that now. We've got an extra week and a bit before our 501st episode and podcast, where we'll do a recap, and we will also pull the winner from the hat for the Penny Dreadful pub quiz. Yes.
Absolutely. And if you're missing any questions, pop over to the website, tvpodcastindustries.com. You'll see all the questions on there. You have a bit of time to get in all the answers, so pop them in when you're doing your rewatch, potentially. Yes,
thank you so much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. We hope you stay subscribed to the podcast as we move into our next couple of shows and our thoughts for the wrap-up of this season and everything we've covered to date. If you enjoy what you hear, why not share it with your friends, because sharing the podcast is sharing the love. Not only just your friends, make sure you share it with your family, especially your granddads and your grandmas. If you've listened to more than just Penny Dreadful season City of Angels, you'll understand why I talk about grannies and granddads a lot.
Yes. I don't know whether you will understand. You'll know that he does, but
yes, exactly. If you want to hear more of my weird accents, you can go over and subscribe at tvpodcastindustries.com to all of our feeds. Make sure you do. Additionally, help us keep the lights on. Go to patreon.com/tvpodcastindustries and do anything you can and get exclusive access to podcasts like Captain America Civil War, our rewatch retrospective, which was an exclusive to patreon.com/TV podcast industry. So donate anything you can and help us keep these podcast servers going.
Absolutely. And that's a really good opportunity to say thank you to all the people that have been supporting us over on Patreon, our wonderful Patreons. Claire, Stuart, Oren, John, Into the Night, Moon Knight Podcast, Amy, Steve, Robert, Jessica, Rich, Alice, Jenny V, and Cassandra for all of your support over the last few months since we started our Patreon. And we have 2 brand new Patreons. We have Kale Hensley and Franca Monteveco, who both joined supporting us during our Penny Dreadful City of Angels podcast. So thanks so much to all of you for your support.
Yes, guys, thank you so much. It reminds us that you enjoy what we do because we love it. But remember, if you cannot support us financially, you can support us by just giving us a like, subscribing, or you know what, even just giving us an old review, because sharing the podcast and telling the world is also sharing the love.
Yeah. Great to have you on board, Franca and Kale. So good of you. Thanks so much for becoming a patron, and welcome to the gang of other patrons as well. It's really appreciated, the support, to help, us with all the podcast action, that we do. So great to have you both on board with the rest of the guys and gals.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being with us. We'll be back next week with our 500th. That's right. 500. I'm turning into the count from Sesame Street. 500th episode of TV Podcast Industries.
Yeah, absolutely.
After that, Ray from Into the Night, the only and the best Moon Knight podcast, will return to discuss the full season of Penny Dreadful City of Angels, plus all your thoughts, plus the pub quiz wrap-up.
And even more importantly, we'll tell you what we're going to be covering next, because we had a bit of a shock this week when The Boys Season 2 was announced as much, much later as we thought it was going to be. It was supposed to originally be out on the 26th of July, 1 year from the date the first season was released. It's actually coming out on the 9th of September. So we have space for possibly another show in there. We're going to discuss that offline and work out what it's going to be by the time we come back for our 501st episode. But we're looking forward to our 500th episode. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you then.
For our 501st episode, will we don Stormtrooper outfits?
The 501st.
And we could form the part of the Irish battalion.
Yeah, the TVPI 501st. I like it.
Yeah, big.
I don't know if the 501st will allow me to do really, really, really bad German accents.
A Stormtrooper outfit.
I think it might be too much on the nose.
But that's because you've got to work both a German accent and the electronic through the electronic faceplate.
Technically, Chris, we don't allow you to do that, and you're still here.
Hey, it's true. It's true.
Thanks so much for joining us. We'll talk to you again next time. Bye.
Yes, thank you so much, guys. Speak to you soon. Bye.
Thanks so much for joining us. Great. It's always a pleasure speaking with you. Remember, keep watching, keep listening, and keep sausaging.
I was sure that was going to be keep crying for the finale episode, not keep sausaging.
You can cry as well.
Okay.
That's why I was teeing up all the sausages throughout the episode.
Bye.
Bye, sausages.